And Monty was saying that periodically on the radio, there's this jeweler's song. And the words that she loved so much, and she was singing them, God, I am your goldsmith. I am a jeweler of your name. Goldsmith Nahari is a slave of the Lord. And it's this beautiful song where Baba's name becomes these jewels, and he talks about the jewels going around his neck in a necklace. Beautiful jewels of his name. So it got me thinking that at Holy Foods, so long ago, Baba's name was a gift that was given to countless thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people who, over the years, made their way to Holy Foods, made some contact. Baba's name was there prominent. And I was thinking, what a gift it is that Baba can give one to be a spreader of his name. And now I'd like to introduce Volume 2 of Holy Foods with Allan Talbot, who has been a jeweler of Baba's name. Woo!
For those who weren't here, let me just give the briefest recap of Holy Foods. Holy Foods was the first large-scale natural food store in Berkeley. And I had 4 partners, 3 were active and 1 was a benefactor. And I owned it for 7 years. By the end, I was the sole owner. And we were the second largest natural food store in Northern California, and therefore probably in the country. And in the course of that, just to give you mere statistics, because I get Baba pictures in the windows, it was the 4th largest intersection in Berkeley. I conservatively estimated 40 million people saw Baba's image. Wow. And 700,000 customers came in and saw Baba's image. Esther Madison lived up there at that time, she's here now. And we gave away 100,000 Baba cards, which I got from Mayor Baba Information, and 30,000 of highest of the high and God in a pill. One of the most important aspects of owning Holy Foods was doing the drug work, which Baba regarded as paramount, as you recall, from the early 70s and late 60s. So those are the raw statistics of Holy Foods. The way it came into being was that numerous persons from what was called the Arbor Cafe, which was owned by 2 Baba lovers, Ed Van Buskirk and Dennis Alessia, decided, because there was no natural food store in Berkeley, to open this store. We had no money, we had a few dollars amongst us, and I found a benefactor. I advertised in the Arbor Cafe, and this fellow named Botan Varga, who was a refugee, he and his brother Peter were refugees from the 1956 Hungarian Revolution against the communists. He came in, and he agreed to pony up dollar for dollar. The only condition was, as I mentioned before, is that I had to drive to a certain street at a certain time, at a certain night in Berkeley, and his lawyer, I would roll down the window and his lawyer would hand me an envelope of money, and I was not to ask questions. What I forgot to mention last time, although it was certainly implied, was what I didn't know, and this is why Holy Foods came into being, and this is the avatar. This is unbelievably Mayor Baba. That money was, Botan was the biggest marijuana dealer in Berkeley. Oh, no. He had truckloads of marijuana being driven in from Mexico, and as a consequence, I didn't know that, because I never would have taken the money. So this is the avatar. He shields us from the obvious in order to do his work. But there's a good side to this. Botan didn't end up getting busted at that time, and he went to jail. But he also financed the first ecology center in the United States in Berkeley, and also my friend Bob Gerner's store, which was called Westbury Natural Foods. And I did mention Bob at the end of the last talk. as one of the most deeply moving experiences of my life, and you'll have to either see the DVD or remember what I said about that, because I can't recap everything. But Botan went to jail for a couple of years, and I wanted to say this about him because I talked about my other partners. And when he came out of jail, all he wanted was his money back, which was interesting. He didn't want any interest. And he got married, so next time I saw him, he was married to this lady named Susan. Botan was like my size, but he was more muscular. And Susan was tall and thin. It was really interesting. And she was an attorney. And she was very sympathetic to Baba, and Botan was an atheist. But because I treated him with love, and he had never really gotten love in his life, I felt, he began to open up to Baba. And I wanted to say that over the course of the years, I could see him in 35 years, but over the course of the next few years, when he would shop in this store, I'd give him a discount, which was inspirational probably too. He began to listen to what Baba had to say, and he began to become a more loving soul. So I wanted to tip my hat to this person who meant a lot. Anyway, I wanted to talk about some of the people I forgot last time, the employees who were Baba people. And first I want to talk about this lady, Patty Johnson, later Patty McCoy. She lives in Clarksdale, Mississippi now. And Patty was a jewel, and she laughs at everything. Usually I say, oh, Patty, and she goes, oh, Allan, and I go, oh, Patty. And that's our relationship. And she used to live down here in LA. Her dad worked at Knott's Berry Farm. I think he was the general manager. And she married a fellow who worked for me named Bill McCoy, who's passed since, and they became chiropractors. At one point in '73, I had hair down in my butt and a beard down to the middle of my chest, and Patty actually cut my hair and beard one night at her apartment. It was quite a moment. And so after that, I had shorter hair, but I hadn't cut my hair in about 5 years at that point. Patty was a wonderful person, and she actually started a blues festival in Clarksdale, which is the home of the blues. Robert Johnson was from Clarksdale about 25 years ago. And those of you who know David Miyake, a musician from my area, his daughter Sarah, who's like my goddaughter, goes to Ole Miss for some reason. And Patty's taken her under her wing and takes her to blues clubs and stuff like that. So I want to tell Patty, Jay Baba for that. Now, I had a manager for about a year. His name was James Taylor. And James lived, not the musician, James lived with Rick Chapman and Billy Ward, who lives in India now, at the Box. There was an actual Box, I should tell you, Maribel information. And James worked for me for about a year. And he lives in Washington. He's a Sufi now. He was one of my closest friends until the whole blow-up came between Sufism and others. And he married Sharon Overton, David's ex-wife, so he doesn't have to work again. But he's a writer, and he's now become a little bit of an actor in Sufism. And he's quite enjoyable. I sent him a tape of the first talk, and it reminded him of many things. But he reminded me of a good story. At one point earlier on, he was my manager for about a year in the beginning, and these country hippies came in, like big guys, and we had aprons that said Holy Foods on there, red and green, and in there we would have like pens and stuff like that. I always had my box cutter. You recall from my friend Betty, she always said I had my perennial box cutter. Also, I had a pricer over my right hand. It was like a gunslinger, you know, from the Old West. And I could price at any given moment. And so these guys came in, and we were just kind of getting started, and they said, we want food. It was kind of easy. You got food, we want food. There were about 5 of them. And so I lined my boys up behind me, and I had Big Arthur there. Arthur was like them, the big burly guy who had been our carpenter. So it was kind of a standoff at OK Corral. Reminded me when I was a kid, you know, in the cowboy movies. And I'm looking around and thinking like, well, who's going to be the spokesperson for us? And I look back and they all step back a foot, you know. So, you know, showing all the courage of having a box cutter in your apron, and moved forward and said, if you guys want some food, you could take leftovers. And they went, we want all, and they started enumerating all the food they want, free food they wanted. We had no money, and nor did we have free food, particularly to give at that point at least. So I backed them off. It was one of the great moments. I resurrected my cowboy experience as a child. Never became a cowboy, but I backed off about 5 country hippies with the, you know, like that kind of thing. Busker guys come from up north. So James reminded me of that.
Well, how'd you win?
Yeah, what was your turning point?
I think I came in a little, the usual accommodation, life being what it is.
You are an attorney.
Early on, it's good to accommodate the neighborhood, Remember I told you last time I dealt with the Black Panthers and the Black Muslims. I learned how to deal with the situation as it arises, in Philadelphia.
Did they get any food?
Yeah, we gave them some food, but not as much as they had hoped.
Did you give food every week? Or?
No, that was a one-time deal. The Panthers got it regularly, but these guys are country. They would just come in for the free food. I had an employee who's not a Bible lover, but I think it's really important I mention her. Her name was Shannon Ty, and she was hired as a bookkeeper, and she became my girlfriend for a while. And I would say, but for her, and I want to say this because she's going to see this DVD. You sent her the last one. I don't think Holy Foods would have made it through because she always encouraged me, supported me emotionally, and had confidence in me. And I was not always clear what to do next. Mayor Bob had come to me, as I mentioned in the prior talk, but he didn't give me the details, and he didn't tell me how much to buy, and he didn't tell me how to buy it. I had to do these details myself. But Shannon had great faith in me, and she actually she has her own business in North Oakland. It was the first of a kind. She's had it for 30 years. It's called About Face and Body. It's a kind of a women's place where they look more beautiful. And I told her never underestimate the vanity of women, and she said that's right. And she's been successful because of that. And she said I was her mentor, but I always thought she was my teacher, to be honest with you. I learned a lot more from her and good judgment and sensitivity than I suspect I ever gave her. She liked Baba. She probably loved Baba in her own way, I suspect, but it was not meant to be. But I want to thank her very much because she'll see this DVD. Another employee that I had forgotten she worked for me was a woman named Ellen Evans, and she's a Sufi, and she spent about a year bagging nuts and fruit up in the office. And Ellen's the president and principal of the Mayor's School, the White Pony Schools. So if you see her today, she's the most professional-looking person imaginable. But I knew her back in hippie days when she was chasing chickens and stuff like that. I was a little more down to earth than she is now. And Ellen has a great giggle, so I'm sure we had a wonderful time together. She reminded me of this Marana that she worked for me, and I wanted to thank her very much. I hope I haven't forgotten any of the Baba people that work for me, but we were just in Myrtle Beach, and there's a woman named Debbie Ramsey there, and she said she worked for me for quite a while, but she was a volunteer. She was only 18, and she was Eddie Hauser's girlfriend. Karen and I saw Eddie and his wife Deborah while we were there, and I thank Deborah Ramsey for working me as a volunteer because you can't meet volunteers when you have no money. So I want to thank Deborah because she may see this DVD too. And she giggles at everything as well. So I think I've hit all the employees who are Baba people that I can remember, and I hope I haven't forgotten any. If I forgot to mention Jack Mormon, he worked for me many years, and he was my closest friend, and his then wife Becky Stows, she worked with me for many years. And, I think I've gotten them all, and I'll thank every one of the Baba people, and I'll tell you my opinion at the conclusion as to my thinking about Baba people working for you. But right now I want to thank them all, and if I forgot anyone, forgive me. I truly hope they don't find out. And Georgiana's moved up to Northern California now, and and Sarah Dwyer lives in Northern California, but they both work for me, as you know. This is a funny story. Baba's drug work was really important. You remember all that in the early 70s. And so we had these organic merchant meetings, and I asked Alan Cohen, who was my good friend. Alan lived up the street, and I'd see him 2-3 times a week. We would shop, or we'd hang out. If he wanted to give a talk at an organic merchants meeting, it was in April of 1969, even before we opened. It was down in Santa Cruz, and I asked Fred Rowe, the head of organic merchants, who's the hero of the natural food business, the organic food business in the United States, if it would be okay if I just brought someone to talk. And Fred said, why not? But he didn't know what I was going to add. But Alan was out of town, so Ira Dietrich, who's the president now of Sufism, and is a lawyer, agreed to talk on drugs. So Ira and I drove down to Santa Cruz, and I remember this very vividly. There was a little hill, and there was all these hippies who were starting the organic food movement in the United States on the lawn. And Fred introduced me, and I introduced Ira. And I introduced Ira by saying, Ira's going to talk about the importance of not using drugs to these hippies, 60 hippies. And Ira's an utterly straight person. And so for 45 minutes or so, Ira talked about Mayor Baba's message of not using drugs. This is one of the more, and I sat there next to him and watched the faces of my friends and future friends as the drug message was being propounded. And it was really interesting, even if they didn't follow it, that they hear that. And later, Fred wrote articles on the sugar story and the oil story, which I mentioned last time, about what kind of, never to use sugar and not to use certain kind of oils. I wrote the drug story, using Baba's words, kind of from God and pill and that kind of thing, and tried to get it going. And I handed it out in my store, and I probably gave away, I'm sure, thousands of them. That was the primary work of this, Holy Foods, giving people an alternative to taking drugs. So as I'm sitting here, I'm seeing the faces of these 23-year-old hippies as Ira, he can be rather strong-willed, preaching to them about the detriment of taking drugs, which was Baba's work, spiritually, mentally, and physically. There was a danger. There was this group I mentioned last time called the One World Family, and it was headed by this cosmic messiah, Allan Noonan. I mean, that's what he called himself. So there was a little competition between Allan Noonan and Mayor Baba, because there's only room for one cosmic messiah, really speaking. But I became boyfriends with this woman named Patrice, who dropped out because of the drug thing. But it was terrible. They had a Marin County house as well, and the kids as early as 10 were using drugs. And it greatly upset me. I asked Alan Cohen if he could talk to this group. And it was like 100 people. They had a restaurant and a large commune in Berkeley. They had a fraternity house, so you could have a lot of people in a fraternity house. So I got to go. They were part of Organic Merchants, and one night, Alan and I moseyed our way over to, I didn't need it, but thank you. You're very sweet. So Alan and I moseyed our way over to the One World Family commune. It was like, and of course Alan Noonan's the boss, so they all were there. And Cohen and he had one of the most interesting debates about the use of drugs. It went on for a couple hours, and I was kind of laughing inside. I think Alan was too, wondering, like, these people are so drugged out, is this making any impression? Yeah. But at the end of it, it was really interesting. Alan Noonan sat there and listened to Alan Cohen, who's a very entertaining person. As you know, you had him here a few weeks ago. But it was serious. And at the end, Alan Noonan said that let's hold hands and do Om, like big circles. So it's all these people. So I looked at Cohen and he looked at me. We said, what the hell, we'll do it. And so we did. And then we left and I said, hey, I used to call him A. I said, hey, that was quite interesting experiences. No, it's good we did that, he said, because, maybe it'll make some impression on them. But what broke my heart was seeing 10-year-old kids smoking pot. That infuriated me, because I knew, and we know, and we knew then, how dangerous it was to these young people. So I felt these people were part of Berkeley, and they had a big restaurant on Telegraph Avenue up near campus, that any impression we could make to diminish the drug use was really important. And I wanted to go to the source. He was the source. He was the boss. Well, the commune still continues. I Googled it recently, and it was still there. He has passed, apparently. He wasn't there anymore. Somebody else is the boss. I don't know how that worked. In the early 70s, late 60s, although this isn't specifically about Mayor Baba, but I think it's important, as we recall, there arose a lot of movements. There was the Black Power movement, obviously grew in the 60s and 70s. I talked about the Panthers and the Muslims, which I had daily contact with, virtually. But also there was two other movements I thought really arose in Berkeley and to some degree in San Francisco, the gay movement and the women's liberation movement, and I saw this right in my store. I mean, Holy Foods was ground zero for everything in the country. It was like the vanguard of just passing everything through because of who we were. My partner, Joel, was essentially gay, and, well, he was bisexual, but essentially gay, and I mentioned last time about the problems he caused, the way he treated the employees. He's an unusual person, that's the most I want to say. But he did take me to San Francisco, and I met a lot of the people who started the gay movement. And it was quite interesting, you know, hearing them talk about the problems they had suffered and watching them go through their thing. My main competitor, although it was in his mind more than mine, was a guy named Vitamin Tom. He was on Clement Street in San Francisco. And Tom was older, and he was also gay. And he always wanted to know how much I was doing per month, because he wanted to do more. He was about in the early 40s, and he had a partner named Kenny, and I never knew, you know, this is before gay marriage, obviously, and I never knew that, well, I never knew gay people as far as I knew, but I certainly didn't know they had partners. And this was interesting to watch their affection for each other. Kenny was quite brilliant. He was the head of the math department at Lowell High School, which is the feeder, the academic feeder school for San Francisco, where Nobel laureates come out of and Supreme Court justices. So watching them, they were friends of mine, was quite interesting. So it really developed in me, and I think it developed in the Bay Area, which still exists obviously, a certain sensitivity towards the suffering of other people, which I was completely ignorant of. And of course now it's more prevalent, this understanding. The women's movement was definitely ground zero in Berkeley, and ground zero in my business. And that was just a fact. And most of my employees were women, and most of my best employees were women, frankly, and I began to depend upon them for their good judgment and sound judgment. Men can move boxes faster, usually, and carry heavier weights generally, but women seem to have a certain sensitivity towards customers, perhaps the guys don't have in the same way. But I also took the attitude that if a woman wanted to take a heavy lifting job, I wasn't going to prevent her. Remember, we're in our 20s, we're not in our 60s at this point. We're barely any of us could do this stuff. So I had this woman who worked for me, Chrissy, who was a jewel. She was a white river raft expert as well. She would do that for us. She said, I want to be the produce manager. I said, done. And she would lift all those heavy crates and boxes. And as long as she could do it without complaining, it was fine by me. And she, you know, and I enjoyed watching her do it. I had done it, so I know how heavy it was and how laborious it was. So, as I mentioned earlier about my friend Shannon, I began to depend more and more on the women for business model as it evolved, because I thought they had better sense of that in some ways. Not that I didn't listen to the guys, because they know how to complain quite well. But you women know that. Now, as Holy Foods evolved, I began to sense that this was a piece of art in some ways. I'm not particularly artistic, but every time we would open in the morning, I'd always sing another opening, another show, because God knows what was going to happen that day. I would open the doors and there would be 20 people there, and they'd come pouring in. Some of them would come 2-3 times a day just for the action. It was a scene. I mean, it was a total scene. And the colors bob up there. So I tried to develop a sensitivity towards, you know, how to put out the produce and what colors and how to match them, and the music we would have, and the flow. And it was like kinetic art in a way, because we had everything going. We had smell, we had sound, we had action, we had movement, we had, you know, how the whole thing is rotated. It was, I've only thought of this recently because I'm not particularly artistic, but I gained a certain sensitivity by listening to Len Oppetic. Specifically, he was a dear friend of mine, and other people who are artistic. If you listen to these people, they'll tell you. This is one thing I've learned about artists. They will be happy to tell you how their situation works. And if you're a good listener to artists, you'll learn something. So I wanted to say that. Last time I talked about some of the celebrities that I had the honor of meeting, Huey Lewis and Gloria Swanson, but I didn't have a chance to talk about them all. Taj Mahal, not the building, but the singer, was a regular customer. He was in when he was in town 2 or 3 times a week. And he was a hoot. I don't know if any of you have been to his concerts or know him. Taj is very sweet. He's very cute. His parents are from Jamaica, but he was from New York. Very bright guy. He went to UMass, I think. And I think he studied agriculture, amazing enough. And Taj, no matter what the weather, would wear the same thing every time. He would come in shorts, an Hawaiian shirt, flip-flops, and a straw hat. It could be 30 degrees out and snow, and Taj walked. So he sauntered into the store, and I say, "It's pouring rain out, Taj." He says, "Man," and he had this really deep voice, which I really enjoy. "Hey, man," I can't do it. It would hurt my throat. As deep a bass as you can get. I'm cool. So I'd say, "So, Taj, I haven't seen you in a couple of weeks. Where you been?" He'd say, "I got women's troubles, man. I got women's troubles." That was his line. He was actually on tour. It was quite cute. He was touring. But he made me, not made me, but he asked me to have every time, at least twice a week, 2 boxes of papayas and 2 boxes of mangoes for him. And that was Taj's thing. So I would always have 4 boxes when he would come in and have his name on it. And I gave him a good price, because you got to give Taj Mahal a good price. And he would sing for me, like Huey Lewis would sing for me. Well, I'd harmonize with Huey. I would, as poorly as I harmonize. But I would ask Taj to sing songs for me. We'd do that privately. So I got my own kind of, my own little tours there, so to speak. So he was a lot of fun. Speaking of people who would sing for me, Misha Lutenberg, Misha? He's been down here. Misha would move to the Bay Area, found Holy Foods real quickly, and as I mentioned before, I had no time. I didn't know if I ate during the day. I barely had time to go to the men's room. But Misha would come in with his guitar, and he would play for me. And I would just listen to him. I was his audience. He could go 45 minutes, an hour, and the other Bible people would be there because he'd sing Bible songs. And somehow it seemed okay, even though God knows what was happening downstairs, because he would do it up in the loft where the office was. And I mentioned this to Misha. I saw him a few weeks ago, and I told him I would mention that to the audience here. And so I proudly say Misha got his start at Holy Foods. I was his first audience. That's probably overstating it, but I'm going to take propriety over Misha at this point. So that was a pleasure listening. He's a Bible celebrity, but not a world celebrity. I remember Bill Walton came in one time. I wasn't there. The big redhead, of course, was big hippie in those days. And I really missed Shirley Alston Reeves, the Shirelles. She came in one Saturday, and I wasn't working. I loved the Shirelles, first well-known women's group, and I would have definitely wanted to sing with her. But sadly, she didn't come back. But I still remember people telling me, "Allan, you missed Shirley Alston Reeves of the Shirelles on Saturday." Man, I was angry. Should have worked 6 days a week. Well, I'm going to talk about Tim Leary. Tim's kids, Tim had a flea, as I mentioned last time, to Algeria, and Michael Porson, the Bible lover, took over kind of looking after the kids. He lived next door. And Tim had 2 kids that I knew, Susan and Jackie. And even though they lived in the Berkeley Hills, like way far away, they would come and shop in the store at least once a week. Susan was maybe a year younger than I, and Jackie was maybe 3 or 4. Jackie was the saddest person I ever met in my life. And what made me happy was making Jackie smile a little and laugh. If Jackie had come in the store and I made him laugh, I felt like I had done a day. Dr. Barucha stayed at our house for a week, and I made Barucha laugh, which I regard as the greatest single achievement of my life. Nothing can top that. But making Jackie Leary laugh also has touched my heart, because he was so sad, probably because of his dad. Susan was utterly the opposite. She was cheerful and buoyant, and she would laugh at anything. But later I heard, and I did tell this to Alan Cohen when he was at our house a few years ago, that Susan committed suicide, and it shocked him very badly, because he knew them as little children, and it upset him. He said, "I knew her when she was a little girl at Harvard and Millbrook." So I would have bet the other way. And I pray that Jackie's alive and he's well now. I really do. Those 2 children really suffered a lot from Tim's notoriety and his disrespect. And he knew about Bible when Alan and Rick and knew about Baba. He knew it from the get-go, and he just chose, because of his strong personality, to reject Baba. And if you hear Alan's stories on it, it's quite, and Robert, when Robert was alive, would talk about it too. We have this taped from our group, by the way, of hours of these talks. We did this a few years ago. So I wanted to talk about that. Because ecology was coming in at this point, we also helped start the first recycling center in the United States in Berkeley. And of course now recycling is mandatory. It's not even like we ever thought about it. I mean, it is. So that was a real joy. And Earth Day is presently coming, and the man who started Earth Day is Gaylord Nelson. The late Gaylord Nelson, he was a senator from Wisconsin. And I thought he was a great man, so I wrote to him, and he would write back to me. So we had a correspondence going. Now, I don't know if it was the staff that wrote to me or he himself. But either way, it was sweet that a United States senator who I was not his constituent, you understand. I lived in California. He was in Wisconsin. I think he took Joe McCarthy's seat. And I had a correspondence. And I thanked him for Earth Day. His first year was 1970, about 2 weeks before we opened Holy Foods. And I want to give credit to him. You know, he passed a couple years ago. Well, I mentioned last time, every spiritual group in the United States came through Holy Foods. It was unbelievable. If you had a spiritual group, you came and shopped at Holy Foods. It was unbelievable. The Moonies would come. God love the Moonies. And they had a farm up in Boonville, which is in Northern California. They would love bomb people, drag them out of the University of California. My friend Mickey was visiting me from Philadelphia, and he was in a men's room. And some Moonies started talking to him and started telling him how, would he want to go up to a farm? And happened to be on the other side of Mickey, you know, in the same bathroom. Mickey he's a real good listener. He's got interest in going, and I had to tell him what it was. What they do is they take you away and keep you there until you're zombied out. Well, they would bring food to Holy Foods and want to sell it because they'd grown all this organic food. And they'd bring in like 25-pound watermelons and say, what do you want to give me? And I go, all right, there's an ethical problem here. I have to pay these people a fair price. I can't cheat them because Bob was looking over my shoulder. So that was always interesting to deal with the Moonies because they didn't say I want so much per pound or so much per unit. I had to actually be honest. It really was quite a dilemma in an ironic way because I had to please Bob. Remember how he just said to please him. I had to please them. I couldn't cheat these people. Even though I knew, I could have said, I'll give you 5 cents for, you know, for a watermelon that could have gone for $5 in those days. You can't believe the prices, how cheap they were. I mean, watermelons, I was getting organic watermelons for 3 cents a pound. And selling them for 5 cents a pound. What is it, like $1.50 a pound now or something ridiculous? The food prices in those days were quite modest. So, everybody was interested in something spiritual. Everybody in Berkeley was a seeker. Even if it was palmistry, occultism, spirituality, political stuff, all in the same body. People came in with many, many levels. You know, and you had to deal with all that and more. It was always fascinating because everybody had a story. They were all seeking in their own way something. And Baba was the one who was attracting them to come to Holy Foods. Karen and I were just in Myrtle Beach about 3 weeks ago, and Bruce Ecker, who was a member of our group that we haven't seen in a while, but he helped revise our bylaws, used to be our president, a very prominent psychologist. When I told him I had given a talk, he said, I wanted to fly down from Northern California to the LA group to hear you talk. I said, you did? Why don't you just come to the house occasionally, you know? He doesn't come to our meetings. So I had a disc. I bought 30 copies of my talk, and I gave him one. And he said Holy Foods meant everything to him in those days. I had no idea. He said, I'd love to come there. When I would come in there, I would see Baba, and it was wonderful. And he was so effusive, it touched my heart. I had tears in my eyes. He had never said this to me, or if he had, I certainly forgot it. To see his face as I'm sitting here now, in the original kitchen as he was telling me this, what I'm telling you now, I cannot express deeply it touched my heart. It was really beautiful to see Bruce's face. Even now I'm seeing it. Fortunately, just 3 weeks ago, so it's very prevalent in my mind. One of the things that was part of my assertion from Mayor Baba was trying to get me on the media. I mentioned last time that I was on television and on the radio, and I spoke at the University of California every semester. And one time I got invited to a Mensa meeting. You know what Mensa is? Mensa is for people in Berkeley, it's not a big deal. Half the people in Berkeley could be in Mensa. You know, you have to have like a genius IQ. So they wanted to hear about natural foods, organic foods. So my friend Shannon and I went over there, we brought some food, and I talked. And my opening line was, without question, I'm the dumbest person here. I was the only person, they wouldn't let me in Mensa, but there I was talking. These people were so great, half of them won Nobel Prizes and grew up for, the Pulitzer Prize. This was a crowd of like 40 people of 160 IQs. You know, I'm a smart person, but not that smart. And we're talking some serious smart, like at the Steve Berry level. See, he's left the room here at this point. So now he won't know that I gave this enormous compliment because no, don't tell him. This is what happens when Steve Berry leaves the room. He misses the important compliments. Oh, and now he's back. So, shucks, he would have heard it.
I won't tell you.
No, don't tell him.
No.
Yeah. So I just got a kick out of that Mensa meeting. Now, this is one of the more important and interesting things. I got invited to UC Med Center, University of California, San Francisco. This is one of the preeminent hospitals, learning hospitals in the world, like Stanford is and UCLA and that kind of thing, on healing. I have hair down on my butt and a beard down to there, and I'm going to UC Med Center to talk to a bunch of medical doctors about healing with my degree in history. But to give me credit, I had read an icon on healing and sound and vibration. So I was quite prepared to give them the best I had from the Sufi master. And they weren't quite prepared to hear about vibration and that kind of thing. I can't remember what I talked about, but I remember a couple of them did leave the room, looking most perplexed, like, why is this guy sitting in front of us telling us anything? But I will say, I probably mentioned Baba's name and the importance of looking at things in a holistic way, which is true, we all know this now. And that I think I made some impression on some of the doctors, because remember, this is 1972 or something like that, where this kind of thinking was not at all known in the West. The idea of the spirit and the body being whole. And so, if you can make 1 inch of improvement in people, that's pretty good, I think. I always said, incremental steps are not bad. We really were only looking to get a few vegetables in the Safeway in the long run. And right now, Walmart's the biggest purveyor of organic foods in the United States. So, yeah. And Safeway sells massive amounts, and I'm sure they do down here with Vons and all the stores you have here. So I think we were quite successful in that regard. But, progress is slow, although we were young, so progress has to be fast when you're 23, right? But as you get older, you realize that progress can come by the inch rather than the yard. The organic food movement is now a $30 billion industry, and Kaiser Hospital has it. Their foods are organic. I have a bunch of articles stating it, on and on. I live in an organic garden in the White House. The president and his wife put an organic garden in there. And I give Alice Water some credit. She never gave me any, but I give her a lot of credit for shaping these, which actually sadly, the front of it burned down about 4 weeks ago, so they're renovating. And, but we weren't trying to take credit. We just wanted to get the job done. And so we did it. And that's what a bunch of hippies. I was thinking, like, when they talk about the organic food movement and how it started, it's all straight people now. And in the old days, it was just a bunch of long-haired, granola-eating Birkenstock hippies. They were talking about me literally. I was that guy. As I mentioned last time, we were the first people to sell Birkenstocks retail in the United States that I know of. And I had hair down to there, and we sold a bunch of granola, as you can imagine. And in fact, I made granola in my oven before I started working at the Arbor Cafe. That's how I got the job. So when they talk about that person, you could say, I know that person, he's my friend. I literally am that person, not figuratively, and I don't care, you know. I'm immune, I'm a lawyer, I'm immune to insults at this point. Not even John Page can insult me anymore. Fred can. I have a question.
Oh, no, I'm sorry, if you're not finished, but...
I'll be finished in an hour.
So the question I had was, the current Whole Foods, is that a spin-off of Holy Foods? Or?
Well, he probably stole the name, but we'll let him slide. No, I don't know the man, and I wish him all the success. But, you know, as I mentioned last time, there were two names where Holy Foods was a compromise. It was either Whole Foods or Holy, H-O-L-L-Y Foods, you know. So we made Holy, W-H-O-L-L-Y Foods. It was an epiphany moment for whoever thought it up. I can't remember if it was me or somebody else that day, one of my partners.
Well, there was about a connection to the Whole Foods too, because it was Mrs. Gooch's in the beginning.
Uh-huh.
And Mrs. Gooch and Susan Epstein, who's a bottle lover,
Yes.
started it in Culver City. And then they expanded and then they sold it to Whole Foods.
Ah, okay, there's always something.